Live from nowhere in particular, it's Post Alley Live. I'm Barry Mitzman here with a number of editors and contributors to Post Alley, Doug McLennan, David Brewster, and Tom Corddry. And our agenda today is to talk about what life will be like, or maybe could be like, or should be like in the post-pandemic era, if we ever actually get there. What opportunities are there to make lemonade out of the lemons we have been delivered over the past couple of months? Doug, let's start with you. What's your vision? You're intensely engaged with the arts community around the country and the world. You're an astute observer of the passing scene. What opportunities do you see?
Well, I think in the first few weeks, as the arts world is really kind of shut down, because there's no way to really do business, everybody's rushed to the lifeboats. And the thing that I hear most is panic, first of all. But second, the idea that we have to rebuild what we have as much as possible. So this idea that we just have to survive this. This is a catastrophe, but we have to survive it. And once we survived it, if we can, things will get better and we'll get back to doing the important work that we're doing. I actually think that that's the wrong way to look at it. And I've been framing it lately as a division of two camps. In the one camp, you have what I call the restorationists, those who think this bad thing is there and let's restore what we have as quickly as possible. And in the other camp is what I call the opportunists, who see that the puzzle pieces have all been thrown up in the air, all the rules are being rewritten, and now is the opportunity to fix a lot of things that weren't working properly very well for a long time. You know, artists, difficult to get paid, housing is terrible, our funding sources are bad. But this fundamentally changes a whole lot of conversations, and we can think about things in a very different way.
David, in your piece in the Post Alley recently about the art scene, you pointed out that something like $30 million a month is being lost by arts organizations in Seattle. That seems just like, it seems so disastrous. It's hard to imagine anything good coming out of it, David.
Well, that's a tricky figure because you don't know how much they've been able to cut down costs and what the net loss is, but it really is dramatic. And fundraising galas, spring things, and as well as tickets. And I know that arts are very concerned about the generosity of their donors because, you know, everybody's stock account is going down. And I also make the point in there is that there is not much money around. There's maybe a third of that is being replaced by these other sources. The payroll protection plan did save, you know, several $1 million to the symphony and to the opera and so forth, saves them for a while. But looking at the coming year, even when you're going to be open and no one quite knows when that will be and what the nature of the experience will be, as well as how much people are now accustomed to watching online rather than actually going to that. And I think that's going to change a lot of that. I would say this is that the arts groups in Seattle before the coronavirus hit were in serious financial trouble. They're overextended, dealing with debt. In many cases, they're marginal already, and so now this comes. And so I would agree with Doug that it's really a chance to rethink. But whether they will is to me always another question, as opposed to just hanging on and hoping for a vaccine.
But there's also a scale problem here. I mean, Americans for the Arts I think it was about April 8th, estimated that up to that point, the arts had lost $4.5 billion, right? And we're talking about that's the first 6 weeks or so of the shutdown. So if you consider that it's going to be, in the, $3-4 billion a month for every month that things are shut down, you quickly get into the 20s and 30s of billions of dollars that are lost. That's catastrophic. That's a tsunami. All of the arts funding organizations, the big national foundations, threw a $75 million fund at it. The cities did, Seattle did. Lots of are doing what they can. But the fact is, the Mellon Foundation, which is the largest national arts funder, has about $6 billion in assets. They could throw every dollar of that into it and rescue the arts sector for a month or two, and then be broke, and everything would go out of business still. So we have to, it's not just that there are other opportunities and that we have to think about things differently. We have to think about things differently. The scale of this is just impossible to address as a kind of let's just get through it.
I hear you about we need to rethink and the fundamental changes are required, but I don't hate to be a Debbie Downer in all this, but it just, Tom, your story about the pandemic here in Post Alley this week was truly a Debbie Downer story in the sense that it of course, it painted this picture of a future in which we will be not only closed down for a lot longer in the coming months, but perhaps closed down periodically again and again over several years. And I want you to talk a bit about the background of that. And then I want to come back to the implications for the arts. But tell us why the people you're talking to think this could be a possibility.
Well, this virus is, they're learning fast out there what it's like. It's not quite the pandemic that ends all human life on the planet. There are actually people who study that and wonder what kind of a virus it would take to do that. And it's not that virus, but the scientists keep tripping over, going, oh my God, it can do this too. It can, even the stuff that didn't make it into the article included, the virus knows how to kill the signal that a cell sends out asking the immune system for help when it's attacked. Where did that come from? So it's really a serious thing, and that's why they think it's got to be a vaccine. If you want to be cheered up, to go with Debbie Downer, there's Bill Upper. Bill Gates posted another long piece on the Gates Notes today, which I highly recommend reading because it's a long summary of what he thinks about the vaccine process.
Yes. What I'm getting at is the prospect of extended or periodically recurring shutdowns. Doug, David, what does this mean for live performance? It's increasingly difficult for me to imagine a scenario in which arts organizations, performance organizations, can resume operations at anything like a sustainable business model.
Yeah, and yet the governor of Texas says, hey, let's open all the movie theaters. The movie theaters say, well, not really. No, this is something that everybody is seriously thinking about right now. And of course, the idea is that maybe some sort of hybrid virtual physical model might emerge from this, since we're not going to get into performing spaces anytime soon. Also, there's the uncertainty of, as Tom says, these waves. When you're scheduling productions out a long period and you can't depend on whether you're actually going to be open or not, that's a real problem. So, without significant testing, everybody who goes into the theater gets tested. Maybe it's like the metal detectors that we're all used to, only it's not just a temperature test, but a 10-minute virus test. Who knows? But until that happens, it's hard to imagine that we're going to be able to get into group spaces again.
I want to move on to other topics, but one last thing in relationship to the arts. David, you brought up about the possibility for digital experiences filling this space, this need for cultural experiences. And I have to say, I don't know if you all saw the I'm blanking here, the great musical theater composer,
Oh,
lyricist,
Stephen
Stephen
Sondheim.
Sondheim. Whoa.
Right. 90th
Sondheim
birthday.
at 90 celebration on YouTube, Broadway.com. I found that wonderful, wonderful, just a terrific experience. And the intimacy of the performances here enhanced the experience a great deal, especially with someone like Sondheim, who's really, it's all about the difficulties of human connection. That's all his work, right? And there it was laid out before you, people in their isolated ways singing about that very thing. Transformative experience, as memorable as anything I've experienced in live theater, I would say. Can we hope for something like that to begin to fill its space?
It was beautifully produced too, and you know, think about the Met Opera, and you know, we filmed things for PBS for years, and it was a stage facsimile, and then the Met came along and reimagined it as a cinematic experience in the language of the theater. There's a language of the screen that's very different from the language of the being in place in person, and when you figure out how to do that, it can be an enormously intimate experience, a wonderful experience.
And then just in terms of recreating the theatrical experience, I recently watched a stream broadcast of National Theatre of London with James Corden, wonderful comedy, hilarious. And it was as though you were in the theater. It didn't have to be transformed. And it worked beautifully, I thought. But so maybe that's a solace we can take in all of this and hope that arts organizations can find some way over time.
But it's a two-part problem. First of all, is making compelling content, but second of all is being able to find a way to pay for it, to make a business model that works.
Yeah, and as journalists, we know all about how to make things pay for themselves, right?
One thing, Barry, I would add about that is that for Seattle arts organizations to broadcast, they run into the problem of competing with the National Theater and competing with the Met and so forth. It's not going to be easy for regional companies to attract wide audiences. That said, I think that there'll be maybe kind of three levels of experience. One is in a smaller theater or with people spaced and so forth like that at probably a premium price, you know, the real live experience. Secondly, a broadcast that is live, that includes a Q&A and some other bells and whistles that you pay for. And then third, later on, an actual free broadcast of that and put into the archives. So one way of looking at that is that you have both the intensity of the experience, and particularly with what video has brought to that, and wider audiences, and two of the problems that arts groups are trying to solve anyhow.
Occasionally, when I do get to experience some of this free content that's now newly available online, I think, boy, this reminds me of newspapers in the 1990s giving away their content over the internet because they wanted to be hip, and it didn't end well. Hasn't ended well. It hasn't ended yet. Tom, based on what you know about the virus, do you see yourself going out to the movie theater or live theater or even a museum anytime soon?
At our age?
All right, let's say a museum. Okay, the theater is safe
okay,
for.
I read something the other day. This is very preliminary, but somebody said, well, let's take a look at all the so-called super spreader events that have happened around the world about which we can get any data, and say, are there patterns there? Are there some of those events that are safer than others or more dangerous than others? And maybe that will help us determine what's most dangerous about the virus. Is it the droplets that are being spewed, or is it the aerosols, or is it the touched surfaces? And the very preliminary analysis said, well, maybe it's the droplets, because a lot of the super spreader events are ones like weddings and funerals, the choir rehearsal up in the Skagit, where people are really projecting. There's some correlation with how loud's the background noise. If people are kind of yelling to be heard close to each other, you get a lot more infection. The people sitting side by side at the opera are maybe not as much at risk as you might think, because there haven't really been any opera super spreader events yet. So, but this again, it's extremely raw and informal data analysis. But we'll learn more about those kind of things as we go forward. So
There's
it's
so much,
possible to have some
so
things.
much we don't. There's so much we don't know is a big part of the problem.
Yeah.
David, what else going beyond the arts? What else? What other opportunities are there? Do you think for the Seattle area, for Washington State, to try to make something positive out of this opportunity, this crisis?
I'd start this round by saying public health and health insurance generally had a tremendous need for that. Another thing is related to that is how we treat homeless people, and we've instead of the kind of warehousing or villages and so forth, now using hotels, using some other things of this kind. And the homeless question, which had been a kind of a civil rights question, is now more of a public health question. And I think the public health lens of looking at things will be obviously a much more important lens.
It may increasingly be an economic and jobs issue as well, in terms of being able to provide economic opportunity for a wider and a more equal sector of the society.
All the contact tracers and
Yeah.
so forth. We
Well,
could
that's
have
true too.
thousands of people hired
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, Doug, what do you see beyond the arts? What do you see as opportunities?
Well, I think what this pandemic has really shown is the real poverty of our infrastructure across pretty much every sector: education, retail, business, transportation, everything. And it shows it's not like we didn't know that our infrastructure was lacking. And certainly our cultural infrastructure has just been, at a terrible disadvantage for a number of years now. But this suddenly forces us to look it square in the face. And the opportunity I see is that it jumbles up a lot of debates which have been deadlocked for years. So if you think about health insurance, for instance, to argue that everybody should have health insurance is a moral good, and who disagrees with that? But it didn't win the argument. Now that it's a matter of public safety, if somebody is uninsured, it's a danger to safety. Now that 30 million people just lost their health insurance because they lost their jobs, you suddenly have a constituency that's going, oh my goodness. That debate fundamentally changes. And I think you can go across sector by sector by sector and see places where the deadlocked framing of these conversations, whether it's homeless, whether it's transit, whether it's, whatever you want to name, are now suddenly all jumbled up. And it will be interesting to see if in the breakup of the logjam, how these reassemble themselves. I think there's some real opportunities there.
David, one impression I have, and I wondered if you share it, is that our elected officials, at least in this region, have acquitted themselves relatively well. I think Governor Jay Inslee in particular has been kind of a star and gained national attention for the quality of his leadership during this crisis. Do you think that we're seeing a resurgence of trust and desire for competent government in the offing?
I have seen that, and I think that as I wrote in a recent article about the way in which the medical profession agreed on an approach to the virus, the way in which donors and large businesses, Amazon and Microsoft and Starbucks and so forth, all got together, and there were very interesting orchestrators of these efforts, and a lot of cooperation led, interestingly enough, by former Governor Gregoire, So we kind of have two governors for the price of one, and uh, it was an impressive bit of coordination and generosity and working from a single playbook. And we'll see whether that continues on. I think another thing that the New Yorker article that looked at the medical profession said is that all of these people understood how to deal with a pandemic. They had been trained at a certain pandemic institute. And the first thing is for the politicians to retreat from the stage and allow medical professionals, you know, the Faucis of the world, who have a lot more credibility and can have a uniform presentation. It's a communications issue and so forth. And politicians are not good at that because they're too busy praising themselves and behaving like Trump. So something got into our Seattle spirit of working together on big projects that that was very encouraging and maybe will continue on. It is, to Doug's point about transformative change, it's interesting how everything that they were doing is basically conventional. Feed money to the arts through existing arts organizations, get more support for existing institutions, even though to some extent these were new institutions created. I told one story about this thing called All In Seattle, which was really just a network of tech executives and the new wealth in Seattle. And they all called their friends and said, let's put some money in. And they raised about $30 million in about a week. Outside of, the Seattle Foundation and United Way and the ordinary bureaucratic institutions. And that's, to me, a sign of how quickly and how friends raising money from friends, how things are going to change in the world of philanthropy. And it may be that the new Seattle establishment, tech-based, wealth-based, very wealthy and so forth, found its hymn book in this last month. And so they could change a lot. And they are disruptors. They're interested in change. They're interested in doing things a different way. And they are a new generation.
Maybe through this crisis, we'll gain a new sense of what's possible and of our capabilities to make real change happen in a positive way in response. We'll have to see. We should close things off, but I'm curious to hear from each of you real quickly. How are you making good use of this shutdown, this time? Personally, I'm hunkered down in Port Townsend, spending a lot of time on the beach. I've read a lot of books in the last several weeks. It's been a strange and eerie time, but a good one in some ways, I have to say. I feel guilty in feeling as good about it as I do. Doug?
You know, work continues. Most of my life is online anyway, so.
The digital man. David?
Well, one of the things that I'm walking a lot, and it's like we're back in Jane Austen's world. Everybody walks and converses and doing that. And I'm also discovering how wonderful my neighbors' gardens are. I mean, this has been a wonderful spring this way, and a bunch of us were talking about this and deciding, go see the one on 38th and go to the one on 30th and so forth. So in some way, back to friends, family, gardens, home, reading, walking. It's in many ways, it's a recovery of old virtues.
Mm-hmm. Tom, real quickly, how are you making good use of this time?
I'm getting Zoom faced.
You'll have to explain that.
But along the same lines, I've had a lot more recent interaction with my siblings, my children, and friends I haven't talked or heard from in a while. Everybody's a little more communicative right now, a little bit longer form in their communications. I'm enjoying that.
Well, thank you all. Tom Corddry, David Brewster, Doug McLennan. Stay safe.